afternoon, and welcome back to Breaking Waves. On today's episode, we get to sit down with Misatau Veve Lupe Matasila Melani Anae, who is the Associate Professor for Pacific Studies at the University of Auckland. Melani Anae has a long history and experience as a social advocate for Indigenous peoples in both social and academic spaces. She was also one of the foundational members of the Polynesian Panthers, which was a social justice movement formed to target racial inequalities towards Pacific and Maori in the 70s and until today. How are you this morning, Melani?
Great, thank you, Hana. Lovely to be here. Malole soifo, malilangi mama. I've been looking forward to talking about the wā
Yes.
and te tiriti o Waitangi with you today, so whaftai lava.
Thank you so much for your time and coming onto our show. We're in very interesting times, but it's nothing new. You know, we've always had people coming into Aotearoa and questioning te tiriti and trying to further define it to suit whatever agenda that they're trying to portray or push in their side of media. But I just want to ask you first, what do you think about what's happening right now with David Seymour's Treaties Principles Bill?
I think it's a joke. I think it's a big joke and absolutely absurd. I'm thinking now about the 1970s and the Dawn Raids fiasco, where we had state-sanctioned racism from the New Zealand government at the time, and where racist legislation was used to oppress the Pacific people, our parents, our grandparents who were living in Auckland. And I think about that, and then I think, well, okay, 2021, the government of the day then apologised for the racism of the Dawn Raids. And now we have this recent fiasco,
Right.
and it's dressed in a revision of Te Tiriti, but it is not. It is a total different treaty of sorts.
Absolutely. And
totally different, and we're falling back into that trap again of oppressing a proportion of New Zealand's population in terms of racist legislation, and it's just it's. I mean, I'm just amazed at how far it's gone, and I mean, it's it's only at its first reading, but
Yeah.
I hope it doesn't go any further than that.
And we just talked about this before the show, is that for anyone who doesn't know the history of Aotearoa and they don't know what Te Tiriti is about, and you're coming into New Zealand, if you were to have a simple glance over what Seymour is proposing, which is all of us get equal rights, it seems like a good thing. Why, in your perspective as a Pacific person, would threatening be the right word to describe it?
What did you say?
Threatening.
Well, threatening. Well, as I said, it's ridiculous because you're taking out the whole socio-historical, cultural context of the original Te Tiriti, which was totally an agreement between the Crown and Māori. And how can you then revise it to become for all New Zealanders?
Yeah.
It's totally wrong, and it's totally misguiding, and it's totally misinformation and disinformation. And if you've got a brain, I think you just have to ignore it.
See, there's a lot of people that would see his principles bills, and they may say comments such as, we're in a different time now. New Zealand is more diverse. We need to, why do Maori people get special privileges? And these are people who usually don't know the history. Would there be
That's
something
right.
that you would say to kind of like convince these kind of attitudes towards?
Well, there needs to be a liberating education. The curriculum is slowly changing in schools, but this whole historical happening, which is crucial for our country to live in peace together, for that to happen. So it's about learning the history and looking and using what happened in the 1840s when it got signed, and having a look at it now. But so I'm really wanting to get into this whole thing about the wā between Te Tiriti and Pacific peoples. So for
Absolutely.
those of you who don't know what the wā is the social and sacred spaces of relationships.
Mm.
You know, it's the social and sacred aspects. It's not empty space in terms of Indigenous or Samoan ways of looking at relationships.
Mm.
It's actually spiritual energy, social and spiritual energy for positive outcomes. Is my understanding of the vow.
Yeah. And that's such a lovely way to describe it, especially the spiritual aspect of it. And I wanted to get into that. Pacific people's history with Maori, Pasifika people's history with Maori. And we've come a long way. And I just wanted to ask you, do you have any histories that you know or were a part of that you could share with us to show that we do, you know, have a relationship that we should be held accountable for?
Yes, definitely. And this is a personal experience, my own family experience. So I'm going right back to the 1900s, early 1900s. The Germans had colonized Samoa, and after World War One, Samoa was taken over by the New Zealand administration. And that was the time when they introduced the flu to Samoa, and a third of Samoa's population was decimated. So the Governor Richardson at the time in Samoa, he was trying to quell a resistance activist movement amongst the Samoans called the Mau. And of course, as colonizers do, he picked on the leaders of the Mau and got a lot of them, you know, exiled with, you know, really questionable, you know, convictions and trials. So I'm talking about Te Pōtama Le Lofi a Ana III, who was one of the leaders of the Mau. So in order to get rid of him, the claims against him was he didn't pay dog tax. Now, dog tax.
What's dog tax?
Does that sound familiar? If you own a dog, you have to pay tax.
Okay.
You know, the dogs in Samoa are all over the place. But everyone owns them.
They have meetings sometimes.
So the dog tax is familiar because if you listen, know your history, you know that in Parihaka, that it was dog tax again. Failing to pay dog tax was one of the things. But the most amazing other thing they got him for was that Richardson wanted to rearrange the villages.
Okay.
He wanted to make it more organised, like, you know, English villages.
Yeah.
And so Te Pōtama was done for not removing a hedge from his own land.
So a dog tax for not paying for the dogs, the wild dogs of Samoa, and not removing a hedge were the two things the German government
the New Zealand.
The New Zealand administration at the time were holding against him to try and find something against him.
And they exiled him to Mount Eden prison in 1929.
That's crazy. I didn't even know that.
They exiled him and he was in prison. He was hardly any Samoans in New Zealand in 1929. And it was cold and dark place for him, a makai, you know, imprisoning him there for 2 years. But what people don't know was that he had a visitor, and it was the Maui Pomare.
Wow.
The Maui Pomare, because the Maui Pomare was involved with the Parihaka incident, and he saw what was happening with his people in Parihaka. So when he heard about the Samoan that was going there, he came to visit Te Pōtama, and he was moved to tears. And the next day he wrote a piece in the Guardian, New Zealand Guardian Samoa article, and it was so sad. He said, "Today I came and I looked into the face of a tama and areki." And, you know, he brought him some books, and he brought him some books to read and some food. And he said, "You know, I'm so grateful I have come here to Port and looked at your face." And he spoke Samoan. He knew a bit of Samoan at that time. And then he wrote that he couldn't get over. He said, "What has New Zealand done in their political humbug? They have jailed this leader. His ancestral ties go back to time immemorial." And so he was very moved by that. And at the end of his publication, he said, ia malosi tamasese, which means, be strong in
Strong.
heart.
Yep.
Tamasese. And so there was that bond, the va there between Te Maui Pomare and Tupua Tamasese. And he even, Maui Pomare, who was an MP at the time, he went against his party in terms of the Samoa address. But it's very personal to me because Tupua Tamasese's wife was my grand aunt,
Wow.
Aisala. So, it was moving for me. And I only learnt this, recently myself,
Yeah.
that she was his grand aunt. My grand aunt.
Your grand aunt,
Was
which was
married
his
to
wife.
Tupua, yeah.
So when they brought her, sorry, this is another question off script.
Yep.
When they brought Tupua Tamasese to New Zealand to be imprisoned, did he come with any family?
No.
They just brought him by himself.
Well, he came with his wife, and this is what I've just learnt recently too, that she was actually a leader of the women's mau that took over and looked after the villages when the men fled into the bush.
Right.
And she was actually, while he was in prison, she was giving talks in Auckland, trying to get support for him and for the Maori in Auckland. So that's what was happening. But the bond between Te Maui Pomare and Tamasese is still alive today,
Right.
because they celebrate it every year. And a few years ago they invited the current Tupua Tamasese to come back to acknowledge that va with the people of Taranaki.
See.
Yes, so there that va, but and also another personal experience that I've had ever since I was a kid, like more than 50 years ago. Whenever I went to a marae, and even now I'll go to a marae, and when the tangata whenua of that marae know that there's a group from Wananui-a-Kiwa waiting to be invited into the marae, when we get to the pai, we will have the elders there, and they will always refer to us as tuakana. They refer to the Wananui-a-Kiwa as their older siblings. So that acknowledges that spiritual va and bond.
That's so interesting. Why do they call us older siblings?
Because Polynesians became Polynesians in in Polynesia.
Right.
The area of Samoa, well, that's
Yeah.
the scientific evidence, but in the area of Samoa, Fiji and Tonga, that's when Polynesians became Polynesians. And then they colonized the whole Pacific Ocean, a third of the world's surface, from as far east as Rapa Nui, up north to Hawaii, and then they ended up 800 years ago, the descendants of the original Polynesians from Western Polynesia.
Right.
So they are the older siblings. But at the same time, we're also acknowledged as Teina, which is the younger sibling, to let us know that we are visitors to their island, Aotearoa.
I see. Yeah.
And so they're just acknowledging their tangata whenua status there. So that is the bond. That's the va that is ancient and it's still alive. But it's just colonization, which has weakened it somewhat. But
Yeah.
it's still there. It's still there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an interesting concept of them calling us younger siblings because they've been here longer than us, but also under the same breath calling us their older siblings
Yes.
on the wider, tangata
Exactly.
moana.
Yes.
So that's really interesting because I moved to New Zealand. Well, my parents moved to New Zealand in 1994, which was the year I was born, and I was basically submerged into a social culture. I went to Southern Cross, which is also a kura school. I was submerged into a culture where the Maori would make fun of the Pacific or the Pacifica kids, and then the Pacifica kids would make fun of the Maori, and how they live and what they decided to do with their spare time. And so to this day, I'm still seeing a lot of those negative attitudes towards each other, like, oh, kua maoli, like let them do what they need to do, it's not our problem. Or they would say we don't need to stand behind them, they have their own issues sorted out. What do you now we've discussed the context of our histories, and this is like just two histories that you've shared with us today. I'm sure there is a vast amount of histories out there on our relationship with Māori. Do you feel how do you feel we could improve this relationship between people who aren't quite knowledgeable on our history together? What ways do you think we could go about improving that?
Educate to liberate yourselves, because I remember my dad, who came to New Zealand in the 1940s, he used to say to me, "Why the Maoris give their land away?" I said, "Dad, you need a history lesson."
Yeah, I've heard that one before. I was like, it's not our fault. They're the ones that wanted to give it up.
But, you know, that's what it is. They have no understanding of the history of how land was taken, not given away. And also they have no understanding of te tiriti, right? So, and then the tiriti itself, they think it doesn't have nothing to do with them because it's between the Crown and Maori, it's articles. But Sir Paul Reeves, in his Waitangi Address 2004, he said something beautiful, and I love it, about the tiriti, and he says, there's too much focus on the technical aspects of the te tiriti, that it's got 3 articles, that it's between Crown and Maori. He said there's a unwritten understanding of te tiriti, which is the philosophical understanding.
Right.
What's good for my neighbour is good for me. You know, it's like the Māori chiefs who signed were wanting peace. That, to me, that's, you know, it's not science, you know, it's not rocket science. It was signed for peace in Aotearoa. The Māoris were wanting the Queen to help because of the land grabbers and settlers, and, you know, and they just wanted peace. And so if we and other ethnic groups in Aotearoa and Pacific people, if we want to be part of te tiriti, then we help to find that peace. That is our part to play in te tiriti.
Yes, absolutely.
And so what we could do is, for all Pacific leaders in the homelands and in Aotearoa, to acknowledge the tino rangatiratanga of tangata whenua.
Right. So that would be a good way to push
sovereignty
for our leaders to come through.
Yes. And why not?
Yeah.
And because Article 2 says they've got tino rangatiratanga of Aotearoa. So to acknowledge them as the people, you know, tangata whenua, political delegations, whatnot. To me, that would be a good start. And then in the curriculum for the school, for the younger generation, to learn about te tiriti and what happened, and how, you know, we've come to, well, we haven't come that far from 1840 because it's still a racist kind of space that we're in at the moment. And
you're absolutely right. Like, education is going to be a major factor in this, and investment into education. When I was in intermediate, all I could remember learning about was Nazi Germany. And what else did we learn? Egypt. And, you know, a lot of these things. But all of the history I am figuring out now about Pacific and Maori people, I'm learning in my adulthood. So I have to make a conscious choice or action to want to learn about these things.
That's right. And that's a really good point, because the Panthers have been doing this Educate to Liberate program in schools for 12 years now. And one of the young kids, this was an intermediate kid, came up to us after our workshop and said, you know, it's one thing reading about this history, but today after the workshop, I can feel it. And so that's because we're still alive. So, you know, it's a living history.
Yes.
It's not reading about something that doesn't exist anymore. So that's the way we can get the message to our kids, is to educate them, you know, give them this education which will free them up to think for themselves and to understand and feel their history.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a personal opinion, but this is kind of why I feel like the types of ideologies David Seymour and the ACT Party is spreading is quite dangerous, because it gives lower value to that history that does exist. Essentially what they're coming out with is everyone, you know, this egalitarian society, everyone deserves a chance, everyone deserves a shot, but we all know everyone doesn't get, you know.
Yes,
like an even.
There is no such thing as equality in society, or one shoe fits all.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing saying it, but it's another thing of how that equality is shared out between different groups of people.
Exactly. And there's justice that lays before
Yes.
that must be acknowledged. But if we just say, look, it's 40 years past now. You know, we're all living, we're not fighting and eating each other anymore. These are not my comments. These are comments I've seen in real life.
Yes.
We should just forget about it and start, you know, our own treaty as a united New Zealand. What risks do you think we run as a nation? When we think like, if we think
polarize. Like it'll polarize the whole of Aotearoa, and it won't be a very happy place. Or, you know, we show off about our race relations to the world, and everybody, you know,
the nice green country where everyone lives in Hobbiton and
you know, and well, I still am proud of New Zealand because I think it's got the best race relation. You know, hasn't got it completely right, but it's better than anywhere else in the world for sure. You know, so I'm proud of that. But we've got a long way to go, and moves like this present government in terms of mucking around. Oh no, I'll quote from Samawi Pomare. He said, political humbug.
Political humbug.
Political
what is a humbug?
Oh.
I have never heard of a humbug before.
A humbug means a nuisance.
Oh, yeah.
Rubbish. It's political, you know, nuisance.
Yeah. And it is rubbish. I'm going to be quite honest. You got they've called them the three-headed taniwha. So, Chris, the messaging is absurd. We needed some sort of leadership, but instead David Seymour was saying one thing, we're going to take the treaty away. Winston Peters is cussing at Māori saying, who said we're going to take the treaty? It was like, your partner in business.
But I tell you what, this colonization is still here with us today.
Yes.
That's what they do, the colonizers. They divide and rule. So they will, you know, polarize us, and then they will come through the middle and rule. But, you know, I think I now go to the Polynesian Panther Party platform, and that's another example of solidarity with tangata whenua. We achieved an apology from the leader of a country. That's never happened anywhere in the world.
Absolutely.
And it's because Ngā Tamatoa and the Polynesian Panthers fought for that in the 70s. So I think, I was going to say something now. I forgot.
No, that's okay. I think the apology was great, but above that, that's a very historical moment for a colonizer to apologize to the indigenous peoples of a nation, and also Pacifica people who came here, you know, on the willing of, we want to work hard and we want to make good means for our families.
Yeah, okay, wait. There's something that's popped into my head.
Yes.
This is what I've found in today's society. They only want to be involved in the now.
What do you mean?
Well, it's like a test tube around the current position, what they're currently experiencing. There's no place for history in that thinking. There's no place. It's like it's irrelevant.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
Because history is very important, right? Totally. And like, I'm going to turn this into a real, like, you know, people always say bringing up the past doesn't help. There's that idea around it, or they don't want to look to the past because it's too emotionally triggering. You know why?
Because you get cleverer.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
And you learn, I'm a big believer in that. And it's analyzing your past mistakes, knowing where you went wrong, and then improving on it.
Yes.
And I wish people or more people would see history as that pathway.
It is. It's like, and it's not just history. It's in your whole life journey, that when you come across an event or something, you've got to know the whakapapa or ngafa of it before you can really involve and understand it to make the right decisions, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so
because you would want context in anything you do in life.
That's the secret of peace.
Yeah,
is knowing the historical context and working together. You know, and not polarizing, and words sound good. Words are powerful, but it's how those words are acted on and how they're dished out to different people or everybody. Yeah, you know. Now I'm talking about the R word, which is IR, institutional racism. We've got to annihilate institutional racism, and then we've got to have mana Pacifica, be proud in who we are.
See, that's a funny conversation, because a lot of the more center-right, you know, ideologists that we see online and on editorial boards through different media, are very confused on what decolonization looks like. See, when I think about decolonization, it's about, okay, we've always used these Western structures, which have proven time and time again they don't work for a certain group of people. Decolonization is being open to other methods of working. Would that be what you would
Yes,
see
well, I'd rather
decolonization
call it
as?
decolonising and re-indigenising, and thinking about our values,
Yes.
and our Indigenous values, which is more important, you know, which would really make positive change. But, you know, white supremacy is fueled by what I call the three C's: colonisation, Christianity, and capitalism.
Capitalism. Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's how we can break down, and racism is just a product of that. So, you know, we need to, like, I'm speaking with my Panther hat on,
Yeah.
annihilate racism in all its form and stand up. If you feel it, stand.
Yeah.
Stand up. If you see it, stand up.
Mm.
And we have in our program our young children in schools now explaining racism to their parents.
Yeah.
Because as one of our members, Tingila Ness, always says, if you're taught to hate, you can also be taught to love.
Mm. Mm. It's a powerful statement. And it's you know, for people who may be raised in hardship, or they've grown up in hateful environments, the act of teaching love is a very, I don't have the word for it right now, but it's an act of courage, I guess.
Totally.
Yeah. But sorry, the reason why I brought that out is I just feel like a lot of people in the center right, or who may swing more to the right, are having a hard time understanding what decolonization means. And that may possibly be due to their lack of willingness to educate themselves, one, or the response that people on that side sit on giving to these kind of people, which should be led with empathy, but I know it requires a lot of heart for someone to respond empathetically.
Hana,
Yes.
they just don't know what it is. They don't know what racism is. They honestly, they do not. Their normality is such that they do not really
Can't even recognize
know.
it. Yeah.
And how can they stop doing something if they don't know what it is that they're doing?
Yeah. So it's the ignorance then. They're not willing to
and
learn.
the unteaching of racism, which is already starting, you know. But that's what is necessary. So it's not a them and us. They're innocent too. They need help. Racists need help too.
Yeah.
You know, they do, because they don't understand what's happened to them in terms of why their actions may be wrong or questionable. So if we need to do this together, and we can do it.
Absolutely.
You know, don't, you know, polarize it. We can do it together, and we in Aotearoa, we're so unique in the world. I'm sure we can do it. We can do it.
I'm sure we definitely can. I believe in us.
But not with this revision of Te Tiriti.
Oh,
Please.
it's terrible. It's making things worse. And what would you, if someone is sitting at home watching this and they want to make a conscious decision to support Māori in the current chaos that we're facing in government today, what would one action they could probably implement right now to support Māori and Te Tiriti?
Well, it's to think about it, and maybe have daily just say, what did I do today which would be good for race relations? And I'm talking about not only Māori, but other ethnic groups too. You know, or they could think of now, you know, I met up with this ethnic person. How did I act? Well, you know, was it a good experience, or was it a bad experience? You know, just stop and think.
Just those small things, so they don't have to go out full blown guns and everything. Yes,
it's down to your everyday normality. And one of the wonderful things that came up when, you know, from a primary school Palangi boy, after our workshop, you know, after, you know, our session, he came and we asked everybody, what did you learn today, you know? And he just stood up and he said, racism is bad. And some of the questions we have is, what does it feel like? What does racism feel like?
Wow.
I mean, so you could, one of the things they could do is just ask a person of colour or Māori or other ethnic group, what does racism feel like for you?
Mm. Mm.
Because they don't have any idea at all. And it's time. We do have a liberating education for everybody.
Yeah.
That's how you can truly decolonize and re-indigenize.
And I think one of the keys, I'm not saying it is the key, but is having empathy to hold that space for people who don't understand but genuinely want to understand.
Oh, totally.
Because I can really see why it can be frustrating, to constantly have to explain that all the time. But the key to it is just having that humility and empathy. But I'm going to ask you one more cheeky question.
You're being very cheeky today.
One more cheeky question. What is your prediction on this treaty principles bill
I just hope it doesn't get past the first reading.
Yeah.
I hope it just
dies.
Gets dumped into the rubbish bin where it belongs.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Awesome. Thank you for that. I'm going to be following it, unfortunately, as it, develops, and hopefully it doesn't develop too far than what we'd expect. But thank you so much, Melani, for coming into the show.
Okay.
Do you have any last words for people watching today?
I just want to say, everyone, Malosi, Fuimaono, be strong. Be strong.
Thank you so much. You have an amazing day, and thank you so much for coming onto our show. Not the last time. We're going to be we're going to be here when they throw away the treaty's principles bills. But thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube. We'll also be plugging in Melani's Polynesian Panthers page, where you can go and see the work that she's doing in our community. Have an amazing Monday.